It's a shame Ariana doesn't have the same ambition, Isabella said, not to me, but to our mother, as if I were a piece of furniture in the corner of the room. But I suppose someone has to be the simple one. Her voice, smooth and polished as the Carrara marble she'd just been bragging about, for her new kitchen slid across the table at Trattoria Bellucci, a restaurant so expensive it felt like you were paying for the air you breathed. A hot flush of shame crawled up my neck, a familiar burn I had learned to ignore since childhood. I focused on the heavy, ornate fork in my hand, tracing its patterns, letting the cold metal anchor me. Across from me, my mother, Eleanor, offered a weak, non-committal smile. It was the smile she used when she didn't want to create conflict, which when it came to Isabella was always. "Now, Izzy," she murmured, a gentle rebuke, with no force behind it. My brother-in-law, Marcus, chuckled, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "Don't worry, Ariana, there's honor in simplicity." He said it like a king, bestowing a compliment upon a stable hand, his eyes gleaming with the self-satisfaction of a man who believed he was the main character in everyone's story. My father, Richard, simply cleared his throat and took a long sip of his Merlot. His silence a form of agreement I knew all too well. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the small window in the conversation I had promised myself I would take. Ignoring Isabella's barb felt like swallowing broken glass, but I had a different purpose tonight. I reached into my bag, my hands feeling slightly unsteady as I pulled out the small, carefully wrapped package. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet, but it sliced through the tension. "I have something for you." I slid the gift across the table. My mother blinked, surprised, then slowly unwrapped the brown paper. Inside lay a simple, hand-bound leather journal. I had spent hours tooling her initials onto the cover. "Oh," she said, her voice betraying a hint of confusion. "It's a book." "Open it," I prompted, my heart pounding against my ribs. She flipped open the cover. On the first page, in my neatest calligraphy, I had written, "From Grandma Eleanor's kitchen to yours." The subsequent pages were filled with my grandmother's recipes, the faded, splattered notes I had spent months hunting down and transcribing by hand. Her famous apple pie, the brisket she only made on holidays, the simple chicken soup that had cured every childhood illness. It was a piece of our history, a piece of the woman we had all loved and lost. For a heartbeat, the table was silent. I saw a flicker of something in my mother's eyes, a brief, unguarded sadness, a memory. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Isabella leaned forward, peering at the book with a crinkled nose. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Ariana, honestly, who even uses handwritten things anymore? It's 2025. If Mom wants a recipe, I'll just buy her an iPad. It's much more efficient." My mother's face tightened. The flicker of warmth was gone, replaced by that familiar, placating smile. "It's very thoughtful, dear," she said, closing the journal without turning another page. She placed it beside her purse with the finality of a closed case, a chapter she had no interest in reading. Then, turning the full force of her attention back to the golden child, her voice bright and airy once more, she asked, "Now, Izzy, tell us about that trip to Europe. Are you still thinking of starting in Venice?" And just like that, I vanished. The journal, with my grandmother's memory carefully stitched into its spine, became an irrelevant relic, and I, the simple one, was left sitting in the silence, the weight of the silver fork in my hand feeling heavier than ever before. The drive home was a blur of streetlights, bleeding into the rain-slicked asphalt. The leather-bound journal sat on the passenger seat, a silent, reproachful passenger. It wasn't the dismissal of the gift that hurt the most, it was the familiarity of it. It was the confirmation of a truth I had spent my life trying to deny. In the ecosystem of my family, I was an afterthought, a supporting character in the grand production of Isabella's life. My mind, unbidden, drifted back through the years, sorting through the evidence as if preparing a case for a trial no one else would ever witness. It started with a bicycle. I was turning 12. For her 12th birthday, 2 years prior, Isabella had been given a brand new Schwinn, a gleaming thing of chrome and bright pink, with white streamers that fluttered from the handlebars. For my birthday, my father wheeled her old bike out of the garage. It was still pink, but now it was a faded, chipped version of its former self. The chain had a persistent squeak, and one of the handlebar grips was split. When I'd mustered the courage to voice my disappointment, my voice small and trembling, my father had placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. He wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. The younger one has to learn to give way to the older one, Ariana. That's just how it is. I learned to give way. I learned that my portion was whatever was left after Isabella had taken her fill. The pattern hardened as we grew older. Isabella's college graduation was a catered affair at a country club, with a string quartet and champagne toasts. My parents beamed, posing for 100 photos, my mother adjusting the lapels on my father's suit, both of them radiating a pride that was almost blinding. 4 years later, I graduated from the same university, summa cum laude. My celebration was a text message. "Congrats, sweetheart, so proud. We're swamped with a work thing, couldn't get away. Sent you something to celebrate. Love, Mom and Dad." The something was a wire transfer for $500. I remember sitting alone in my tiny studio apartment, the diploma in its cardboard tube on my coffee table, staring at the notification on my phone. The silence in that room was louder than all the applause at the ceremony, but the sharpest wounds weren't from the things I didn't receive. They were from the words that defined me. The memory came back with a clarity that still stole my breath. I was 16, struggling to make friends, preferring the quiet company of the library to the loud, chaotic energy of high school parties. One evening, my mother found me reading in my room. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, a look of weary disappointment on her face. "You know," she'd said, her voice soft but the words like stones, "your sister, Isabella, she's so charming, so beautiful. She just glows. She knows how to make people happy, how to make them feel at ease." She paused, letting the comparison hang in the air between us. "And then there's you, Ariana. You just bury your head in books, as dry and serious as a little old lady. Dry and serious, simple, the one who has to give way." I pulled into the driveway of my small rented house, a engine humming quietly, before I cut it off, plunging myself into darkness and silence. The rain pattered softly on the roof. I looked at the journal on the seat beside me, its tooled leather cover, almost invisible in the gloom. It wasn't just a book of recipes. It was a testament to who I was, a person who remembered, who cared, who took the time to piece together the fragments of the past. And they hadn't even bothered to turn a page. The loneliness that washed over me was immense, a cold and desolate sea. It was the feeling of being utterly and completely unseen. And in that deep, quiet darkness, a new feeling began to stir. Not anger, not yet. It was something colder, harder. It was resolve. The woman my family saw last night, the quiet and simple one, ceased to exist at 5:30 the next morning. The real me, the one they refused to see, rose in the pre-dawn darkness, the city lights still glittering outside my small apartment window. There was no bitterness in my routine, only purpose. A 5-mile run, a quick shower, and a simple breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee. By the time I walked into the glass and steel tower of Innovate Analytics, I was no longer just Ariana. I was Ms. Flores, head of the data science division. The boardroom on the 40th floor was intimidating by design, a fishbowl of corporate power with a panoramic view of the city. But it was my territory. I stood at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by a screen displaying complex charts and predictive models. Before me sat the executive board, 6 men and 2 women in bespoke suits, people who managed billion-dollar portfolios and didn't suffer fools. And by implementing this new predictive algorithm, I said, my voice calm and steady, we can anticipate shifts in consumer sentiment with 94% accuracy, allowing us to adjust our clients' marketing spend 3 to 5 days ahead of the curve. This translates to a potential Q4 savings of $8 million. I clicked to the final slide. Silence. Mr. Thompson, the stern-faced CFO, peered at me over his glasses. Impressive numbers, Ms. Flores, but how robust is the model against anomalous data events, like the supply chain collapse we saw last year? It was the test, the one question designed to see if I truly knew my craft. I didn't flinch. It's a valid concern, Mr. Thompson. The model has been stress-tested against 3 separate black swan scenarios, including a simulated data blackout. On page 14 of your report, you'll see the risk mitigation protocols. We don't just predict the storm, we build a shelter for it. He nodded slowly, a rare smile touching his lips. Excellent, thorough as always. In that room, my words had weight. They were parsed, analyzed, and valued. Here, I was not dry and serious. I was thorough and professional. My ambition wasn't a flaw. It was the engine that drove the entire department. This was my reality, a reality my family was willfully blind to. My apartment was a stark contrast to my office. It was small, meticulously clean, and sparsely furnished. There were no designer couches or imported marble. My biggest indulgence was a bookshelf overflowing with textbooks on machine learning and economic theory. After work, I didn't order takeout. I tied on an apron, put some music on a small speaker, and cooked a simple meal of chicken and roasted vegetables. It wasn't about deprivation, it was about discipline. Every dollar I saved was a brick in the wall. I was building around my future, a fortress my family couldn't touch. Later that evening, while Isabella was likely admiring her new Tuscan countertops, I was sitting at my small desk, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. My laptop was open, not to Netflix or social media, but to an online course. Advanced Python for Data Structures. I traced the lines of code on the screen, my mind focused, absorbing the logic, strengthening my skills. Each problem I solved, each line of code I wrote, was a quiet act of rebellion. They thought I was standing still, a simple girl with no ambition. They had no idea I was building an arsenal. The quiet hum of my laptop was the only sound in the room, a stark contrast to the storm that was beginning to brew outside my window. Rain tapped against the glass, a gentle rhythm at first, then growing more insistent. It was a sound that always took me back 3 years to a different apartment, a different storm, and the night the foundation of my world cracked, 3 years ago. The knock on my door was frantic, jarring me from the report I was writing. It was nearly 11 at night, and a ferocious thunderstorm was lashing the city. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peered through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was my father, but it wasn't the man I knew. Not the composed, self-assured Richard Flores who wore his success like a well-tailored suit. The man standing in the hallway of my cheap apartment building was a stranger. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his expensive overcoat was soaked through and dripping onto the worn carpet, and his face was a ghastly shade of pale. I fumbled with the lock and threw the door open. "Dad, what's wrong? What happened?" He stumbled inside, bringing the smell of rain and desperation with him. He didn't seem to see the small, tidy space around him. His eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, were locked on my face. "I've ruined everything, Ariana," he whispered, his voice raspy and broken. "Everything." He collapsed onto my small sofa, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders, which had always seemed so broad and capable, were shaking with ragged sobs. I had never seen my father cry, not once in my life. The sight was so fundamentally wrong, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. I knelt in front of him, my mind racing through 100 terrible possibilities. "Dad, talk to me. Is it Mom? Is she okay?" He shook his head, looking up at me. "Your mother. She can't know. She can never, ever know." He took a shuddering breath. "The business, it's gone. It's been gone for a while. I kept trying to fix it, taking out loans, leveraging the house." The word hung in the air between us. The house, the big colonial on Maple Drive. The backdrop to every family photograph, the symbol of my parents' perfect life, the stage upon which Isabella's triumphs had always been celebrated. "I've mortgaged it 3 times, he confessed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame. "The bank, they called today. They're going to foreclose. We're going to lose it all." The weight of his words settled in the pit of my stomach, cold and heavy as lead. I saw it all then, the cracks behind the perfect facade, the desperate charade he had been playing. He grabbed my hands, his grip surprisingly strong, desperate. "Ariana, please, you're the only one I can turn to. You're the smart one, the sensible one. Your mother. If she finds out I failed like this, the shame of it will kill her, and Isabella." He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. Isabella wouldn't be able to handle the collapse of her perfect world. "I need your help," he pleaded, tears streaming freely down his face now, mingling with the rain on his cheeks. "But you have to promise me. You have to swear you will never tell them. Not a word. This secret stays between us. The shame of this, it would kill the whole family." I looked at my father, this broken, terrified man, and the years of resentment, of being second best, of being the afterthought, they all seemed to fade into the background. In that moment, he wasn't the man who forgot my graduation or dismissed my passions. He was just my dad, and he was drowning. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to run, to save myself from their collapsing world. But my heart, foolish and bound by a daughter's sense of duty, wouldn't let me. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. $8,000 a month, he choked out, "to cover the payments and keep the bank away." It was a staggering sum, more than half of my take-home pay at the time. It was a fortune. It was my future. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and made the decision that would change the course of my life. "Okay," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay, Dad, I'll do it." The rain outside my window was a downpour now. The Python code on my laptop screen blurred. $8,000 a month for 36 months. It was a secret I had carried alone, a silent sacrifice that explained my small apartment, my frugal life, my lack of ambition. It was the price of their peace, the cost of their lies, and I had paid it, every single cent. That number, $8,000, became the silent, invisible ruler of my life. It was a ghost that haunted my bank account, a debt owed to a life I wasn't living for people who didn't see me. It dictated every choice, from the brand of coffee I bought to the future I was allowed to dream of. The true cost wasn't measured in dollars and cents. It was measured in the accumulation of voids, in the lives I could have lived but didn't. I remember the day the first major payment cleared. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, and to distract myself, I opened Facebook. The first thing I saw was a photo from Isabella. She was standing in front of a boutique, holding up a brand new Louis Vuitton handbag, the kind that costs more than my rent. Her smile was dazzling. The caption read, "A little retail therapy to celebrate a successful week. Hubby knows how to spoil me. It's blessed." I stared at the picture, at the gleaming leather and polished brass, and I felt a wave of nausea. The money I had just sent, the money that kept a roof over that very handbag's head, was a secret she would never know. I was funding the stage props for her perfect life, while mine was being quietly dismantled, piece by piece. The voids began to stack up. My best friend since college, Chloe, had been planning a trip to Japan for us for years. It was our dream to see the cherry blossoms in Kyoto, get lost in the neon labyrinth of Tokyo, eat real ramen until we couldn't move. A month before we were supposed to book the tickets, she called me, bubbling with excitement. I can still hear the joy in her voice, and I can still feel the lie sticking in my throat like a fishbone. "Chloe, I'm so sorry," I'd said, forcing a tone of professional regret. "A huge project just landed on my desk. There's no way I can get the time off." The disappointment in her voice was a physical thing, a weight on the other end of the line. She went without me. 2 weeks later, my social media feed was filled with pictures of her, standing alone under a canopy of pink blossoms, a bittersweet smile on her face. Each photo was a stab of guilt. I was paying to preserve my parents' past while forfeiting my own present. Then came the opportunity that still keeps me up some nights. A colleague from my first job, Ben, a brilliant but eccentric programmer, had an idea for a tech startup. He wanted to build a platform that used AI to streamline logistics for small businesses. He had the vision, but he needed a data scientist to build the core engine. He came to me. "Ari, you're the sharpest mind I know," he'd said over coffee. "I'm raising seed money. I need 50,000 from you. But I'm not just offering you a stake. I'm offering you a partnership. We could build this thing together." $50,000. To the woman my family thought I was, it would have been an impossible sum. But to the real me, the head of data science, it was manageable. It was a risk, but a calculated one I was uniquely qualified to take. But I didn't have $50,000. I didn't even have 5. Every spare cent was being funneled into the black hole of my father's secret. I had to turn him down. I told him I couldn't take the risk, that I preferred the stability of my corporate job. The look on his face wasn't anger, but a kind of sad confusion. He knew my talent. He couldn't understand my lack of courage. Last year, Ben's company, LogiNext, was acquired by Amazon for $400 million. My $50,000 share would have been worth $20 million. I saw the news on a business website, and I had to go into the office stairwell and sit on the cold concrete steps for 10 minutes, just breathing so I wouldn't be sick at my desk. But the highest price, the one that left the deepest scar, was Alex. He was an architect, a kind, steady man with warm eyes and a laugh that made me feel safe. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by someone. He didn't care that I was quiet. He said he loved the way my mind worked. He wasn't impressed by titles or money. He was impressed by my passion for my work and the way I could explain complex ideas so simply. We were happy. For 2 years, we were blissfully, uncomplicatedly happy. The end began on a Sunday afternoon. We were lounging on the couch in my apartment, scrolling through real estate listings on his laptop, a casual fantasy we often indulged in. "Look at this one," he said, turning the screen towards me. It was a 2-bedroom condo in a nice neighborhood, with a big balcony perfect for the herb garden I'd always wanted. With our combined incomes, we could actually afford this, Ari. We could stop paying rent and start building something for us. His voice was full of hope and excitement, but all I felt was a surge of ice-cold panic. Our combined incomes. He knew I made a good salary, but he had no idea that nearly half of it vanished every month. I couldn't explain why I had so little saved. I couldn't tell him that my financial future was shackled to my parents' house. I pulled away. "I don't know, Alex. It's a big step." "It is," he said gently, "but we're ready for it, aren't we?" I have a lot of old student debt I'm still paying off," I lied, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's more than you think." He accepted it at first, but the conversation opened a crack in our foundation. He would bring up moving in again, and I would evade, change the subject, or start a stupid argument about something else entirely. He started to look at me with a pained confusion in his eyes, the same look Ben had given me. He couldn't understand why I was holding back, why I was so afraid of a future he was trying to build with me. The final conversation happened in his car after a quiet dinner. He pulled over a block from my apartment and turned off the engine. "Ari, I have to ask," he said, his voice heavy. "What are you so afraid of? It feels like there's a wall around you and you won't let me in. I want to build a life with you, but I can't do it alone." Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't give him the one thing he needed, the truth. The promise I made to my father in the rain that night had become a cage. "I can't," I whispered, the words breaking my own heart. "I'm sorry, Alex, I just can't." He didn't argue, he just nodded slowly, the light in his warm eyes finally extinguishing. "I guess that's my answer then." He walked me to my door, kissed me on the forehead one last time, and left my life. I watched his car's taillights disappear down the street, and I knew I had sacrificed my own chance at happiness to maintain the illusion of my family's. The price of their secrets was my love story, and it was a debt I knew I would be paying for the rest of my life. The phone rang a week later, on a Tuesday night. The caller ID flashed Mom. My first instinct, as always, was a mix of obligation and a low-grade dread. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing my face into a mask of neutrality, even though no one could see me. "Hi, Mom." "Ariana, darling, how are you?" Her voice was like honey, a sweet, warm tone she rarely used with me. It was the voice she reserved for her garden club friends, or for smoothing things over with Isabella after a petty argument. It was a warning siren. "I'm fine, Mom, just working. Everything okay?" "Oh, everything is wonderful," she chirped. "I was just thinking about you. We really should have lunch soon." A pause. "You know, your sister and Marcus are doing so well. Marcus is in talks for a huge new partnership, and it's all about appearances, you know. You have to look the part." Here it comes, I thought. my stomach tightening. "They've found the most perfect new car," she continued, the words tumbling out in a practiced rush. "A beautiful Lincoln Navigator. It's exactly the kind of thing that says successful and reliable to these new partners. There's just one tiny little snag with the financing. Their credit is a bit complicated at the moment, with the kitchen remodel and everything." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I knew my silence would force her to be direct. "So," she said, her voice losing a little of its honeyed edge, "we were thinking, you have such a stable job and good credit. If you would just co-sign the loan for them, it would be a huge help. It's really just a formality." I closed my eyes. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like watching someone complain of thirst while they were actively drowning you. For 3 years, I had been the silent, secret pillar, holding up their entire world, and now they wanted me to volunteer for the public duty of holding their shopping bags. "I don't know, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "That's a big financial risk." The honey vanished completely, replaced by the familiar, sharp sting of maternal disappointment. "A risk? Ariana, this is your family. Your sister needs this for her husband's career, to secure their future. You live alone in that little apartment. What do you need all that money for anyway? It's not like you have a family to support." The words, so casually cruel, struck a nerve that had been rubbed raw by the memory of Alex's face in the car that night. "You don't have a family to support." The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. I was supporting all of them, at the cost of the family I might have had. She wasn't finished. "Helping your family is the least you can do. After everything your father and I have done for you, the sacrifices we made to raise you." And that's when it happened, the snap. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, profound shift deep inside me. The years of hurt, the constant ache of being second best, the deep loneliness of my sacrifice, it didn't vanish, it crystallized. The pain fused into something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. It became a weapon. I realized in that moment that they would never stop. Their selfishness was a bottomless pit, and they would keep throwing my life into it until there was nothing left. They would take my money, my opportunities, my love, my future, and they wouldn't even have the grace to say thank you. The hurt was gone. In its place was a calm, chilling certainty. The debt was paid. The silence was over. "Ariana, are you there?" my mother asked, her voice laced with impatience. I took a slow breath, my hand steady on the phone. "I'm here, Mom," I said, my voice unnervingly serene. "You've given me a lot to think about. I'll have to get back to you." Before she could argue, I ended the call. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. They had just asked for one last drop of water. They had no idea they were about to get the flood. The ballroom at the Oak Ridge Country Club was a masterpiece of calculated elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in pristine white linen, and the air hummed with the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of polite, wealthy conversation. It was the perfect stage for the performance of the perfect family, and tonight, the occasion was my father's 60th birthday. This was their arena, a place where appearances were currency and they were billionaires. From my small table in the corner, I had a perfect vantage point. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play I had seen 100 times before. But tonight, I knew the ending had been rewritten. Isabella and Marcus were the stars, as expected. They moved through the crowd like synchronized swimmers, weaving between my father's business partners and my mother's friends from the charity board. Isabella, in a shimmering emerald dress that cost more than my first car, would offer air kisses that never quite touched a cheek. Marcus would follow with a firm handshake and a laugh that was just a little too loud, ensuring everyone knew how successful and at ease he was. They were a well-oiled machine of social grace and superficiality. "Richard, Eleanor, you've raised a wonderful daughter," I heard one of my father's associates say, as Isabella passed him a canapé. "She's a credit to you both." My mother beamed, placing a hand on Isabella's arm. "We're so proud of her. She and Marcus are such a team." I took a slow sip of ice water, the cold glass a steadying presence in my hand. There was no anger, no sting of jealousy. There was only a profound, crystalline calm. The silence before the storm. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was a spectator with a backstage pass, waiting for my cue. The main event of the pre-dinner mingling was, of course, the gift. Marcus tapped a glass for attention, and the room quieted. Isabella stood beside him, holding a small velvet-wrapped box. "Dad," Isabella began, her voice resonating with practiced emotion, "we know you've worked so hard your entire life to give us everything. We wanted to give you something to mark this milestone, something timeless, just like your guidance and love." She handed him the box. My father opened it, and a collective gasp went through the nearest tables. Inside, nestled on a satin pillow, was a Patek Philippe watch. It was exquisite, a symphony of gold and intricate gears. A statement. My father, a man I now knew, was drowning in secret debt, put on a flawless performance of overwhelmed gratitude. He hugged Isabella, then Marcus, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked them. "This is too much," he said, for all the world to hear. I don't know what to say. I knew what he should say. He should say that the watch on his wrist was a lie, paid for with money they didn't have, to impress people who didn't matter, while the very foundation of his life was being paid for by the daughter he never saw. But he didn't. He strapped the lie to his wrist and held it up for everyone to admire. I sat perfectly still, observing every false smile, every hollow compliment. My heart didn't ache, it didn't race, it beat with a slow, steady rhythm. The rhythm of a clock, ticking down the final seconds before the truth would strike. The master of ceremonies was walking to the podium. The speeches were about to begin, the stage was set. After a round of polite applause for my father, Isabella glided to the podium, her emerald dress catching the light. She picked up the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who believes her voice deserves to be heard. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her smile radiating a warmth that could melt glaciers, a warmth she had never once directed at me. "To see all of you here tonight, celebrating my father, my hero, is truly overwhelming." She launched into a speech that was a masterclass in sentimental clichés. She spoke of my father as a pillar of strength, a guiding light, and a man who taught us the value of hard work and integrity. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat and quickly swallowed it down. The man she was describing was a phantom, a character in a play. The real man was wearing a lie on his wrist and hiding behind a wall of my money. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Then her eyes found me in my corner. A subtle shift in her expression, a tightening around her mouth. "And on a personal note," she continued, her voice softening into a tone of feigned sisterly concern, "I also hope tonight serves as an inspiration. I hope it inspires my dear sister Ariana to see what's possible when you truly apply yourself and realize the value of family. I hope she'll be inspired to contribute more, to step up instead of just standing still. The insult was so skillfully delivered that to most people in the room, it probably sounded like a gentle encouragement, but I and my parents knew exactly what it was. A public declaration of my perceived failure. A reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. It was then that the universe provided the catalyst. Her 8-year-old son, Leo, who had been fidgeting at the head table, reached for his glass of water and knocked it over. The water spread in a dark stain across the white linen tablecloth. It was a small, childish accident. Isabella's head whipped around. The warm, loving daughter vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. "Leo, what did I tell you?" she hissed, her voice a low, vicious thing that cut through the ballroom's gentle hum. "Sit still. Can't you do one simple thing right?" The boy flinched, his eyes wide with fear and humiliation. Several nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. But Isabella wasn't done. She wasn't just going to discipline her son. She was going to use him to land her final cruelest blow. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, across the room. Her voice rose, sharp and clear for everyone to hear. "You look at your Aunt Ariana, Leo. You look at her right now. If you don't work hard, if you don't have ambition, if you don't listen to your mother and father, you will grow up to be just like that. Is that what you want?" A wave of shocked silence rolled through the room. It was no longer a passive-aggressive jab. It was a public execution. She hadn't just insulted me, she had branded me as a cautionary tale, a specter of failure to frighten her own child with. She was poisoning him with her own brand of casual cruelty. And in that moment of absolute breathtaking humiliation, something inside me finally broke. But it wasn't a messy, emotional shattering. It was a clean, silent fracture. The last fragile thread of familial duty, of a daughter's ingrained hope for love and acceptance, didn't just snap. It vaporized. All the pain, all the years of feeling invisible, didn't burn into a fire of rage. It condensed into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. The time for silence was over. The time for standing still was done. The bill for their comfort, paid for with my life, had just come due. I didn't move at first. I let her words, sharp and venomous, hang in the air, a toxic perfume that settled over the entire ballroom. I let the guests squirm in their seats, their polite smiles frozen on their faces. I let my nephew, Leo, stare at me from the head table, his young face a canvas of confusion and learned shame. I let my parents freeze in a tableau of public horror, not for my sake, but for the unforgivable breach of social etiquette. And then, with a calm that felt like it had been forged in the absolute zero of deep space, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of the leg against the polished floor was a gunshot in the silent room. Every eye, 100 pairs of them, swiveled to follow me as I stood up. I was not wearing a shimmering emerald gown that screamed for attention. I was in a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress that spoke of quiet confidence. I was not the star of this show. I was the auditor, here to finally, irrevocably, settle the books. The walk to the podium wasn't long, but it felt as if I were crossing a continent. With each deliberate step on the plush carpet, I felt the years of silence, of being the afterthought, of being the simple one, fall away from me like a heavy, suffocating coat I no longer needed. Isabella was still standing there, the microphone held loosely in her hand, a look of irritated confusion on her face, as if I were a waiter coming to clear the glasses at an inappropriate moment. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to dismiss me, to send me back to my corner. She never got the chance. I didn't ask for the microphone. I simply reached out and took it from her grasp. Her fingers, so used to holding on to everything she wanted, went slack with sheer surprise. It was the first time in our lives I had ever taken anything from her. I turned to face the room, a sea of bewildered, curious faces looking up at me. I could feel the heat of the spotlight on my skin, but inside I was ice. My voice, when it came out, was perfectly even. It held no tears, no anger, no tremor of the humiliation I had just endured. It was the same voice I used in the boardroom when presenting a multi-million-dollar projection. Calm, factual, utterly in control. "Thank you," I began, my eyes finding Isabella's stunned face. "Thank you for your words, Isabella, and especially for your concern for my future." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it became a tangible thing. "You're right, it is long past time I stopped standing still. It's time I started making a real meaningful contribution to this family." Then I turned my head slowly, deliberately, until my gaze rested on my mother and father. My mother's face was a tight mask of warning, her eyes wide, silently screaming at me to sit down, to be quiet, to not ruin the perfect party. My father refused to meet my eyes, staring intently at the new watch on his wrist, as if it held the secrets to time itself. So in that spirit of contribution, I continued, my voice resonating through the silent room. The very significant one I have been making will now come to an end. The $8,000 mortgage payment that I have been secretly paying for our parents' house every single month for the last 3 years will officially stop as of tomorrow morning. A collective gasp went through the room, a sharp, unified intake of breath, like a wave receding from the shore. It was followed by a silence so absolute, so profound, that I could hear the faint, high-pitched hum of the air conditioning system. Then a sound, a dull, wet thud, followed by a soft splash. My father's hand had gone limp, and his crystal glass of Cabernet had slipped from his fingers, landing on the thick carpet. It didn't shatter, it just lay there, the dark red liquid spreading outwards, a blooming, accusing stain on the perfect cream-colored floor. My mother's face had gone the color of parchment. Her mouth was slightly open, her carefully applied crimson lipstick suddenly looking garish and clownish against her bloodless skin. She looked from me to the wine stain, then back to me, her eyes filled with a dawning, frantic terror. This was not a social misstep. This was an explosion. I wasn't finished. I kept my gaze locked on my parents, the authors of my silence. "That money," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming as cold and sharp as ice, which totals $288,000, by the way, was earned at my standing still job. I let my eyes scan the crowd, moving past the shocked faces of my parents' friends and associates. My job as the head of data science at Innovate Analytics with an annual salary of $180,000. Whispers erupted around the room, a low, hissing tide of shock and frantic speculation. People were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at my family with a new, dawning, horrified understanding. The narrative had been flipped. "But I know," I said, raising my voice, just enough to cut through the murmurs, my tone one of reasonable consideration. "It's easy to dismiss words in a moment like this, so let me offer something more concrete, something you can see." I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my smartphone and a small adapter. The same high-definition projector that had, minutes before, been displaying a sentimental slideshow of my father's life was still on. With a few calm, deliberate movements, I walked to the tech table and plugged the adapter into the waiting HDMI cable. The screen flickered. The slideshow vanished, replaced by my phone's simple, organized home screen, projected 10 feet high for everyone in the room to see. The whispers died instantly. Every eye was glued to the screen. I opened my banking app. The interface was stark, professional, and brutally clear. With my thumb, I navigated to my transaction history. "This," I said, my voice narrating the silent evidence, "is the first transfer dated October 15th, 3 years ago. $8,000 to Midstate Mortgage Servicing." I scrolled down with a flick of my thumb. The list moved up the screen. And the next, 36 of them in total. A clear, undeniable, digital record of my contribution. The dates, the amounts, the recurring payment to the mortgage lender, it was all there. A digital ledger of their lies and my sacrifice, broadcast for their entire world to witness. I looked at my family one last time. Marcus was staring at the screen, his jaw slack, the smug smirk completely wiped from his face, as he no doubt did the math. Isabella looked as if she'd been physically struck, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted rage at being upstaged, at having her reality dismantled. My father had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. And my mother was just staring at me, her mask of perfect matriarch finally, irrevocably shattered, revealing the ugly, desperate truth beneath. I unplugged my phone and placed the microphone gently back on the podium. My speech was over. "So to my sister, thank you again for the inspiration," I said, my voice returning to a normal, conversational volume, though it carried through the stunned silence like a judge's gavel. "You were absolutely right. My contributions to this family start tomorrow, by stopping today." Then I turned, walked off the stage, past my empty corner table, and straight towards the grand double doors of the ballroom, leaving them all behind to drown in the truth. The moment I closed the apartment door behind me, the silence was a physical thing. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence I was used to. It was a vast, calming quiet that rushed in to fill the space where a lifetime of obligation used to be. I leaned my back against the door and slid my shoes off, letting them fall to the floor with a soft thud. I felt impossibly light, as if for the past 3 years, or maybe my entire life, I had been carrying an invisible, crushing weight on my shoulders. And in that ballroom, I had finally shrugged it off. My purse started to vibrate on the entryway table. I glanced at the screen. Dad calling. I watched it buzz, the name glowing insistently. A few seconds after it stopped, it started again. Mom calling. Then a rapid-fire series of texts, the screen lighting up with each one. Then a new call. Isabella, and finally one I hadn't expected so soon. Aunt Catherine, they were scrambling. The perfect family portrait had been torn to shreds, and they were frantically trying to tape it back together, to manage the fallout, to control the narrative, to control me. For a moment, the old, conditioned instinct flared up, the urge to answer, to explain, to manage their emotions, to absorb their anger. But it was just a phantom limb, a twitch from a part of me that was already gone. Calmly, I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the green answer icon for a beat, and then I slid it over to the power button instead. I held it down until the screen went black. The silence that followed was complete, absolute, and entirely my own. I walked into my small kitchen, my steps feeling measured and sure on the cool linoleum floor. I didn't reach for a cup of tea or a glass of water. I opened the bottle of good Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion I could never quite define. Tonight, I realized, was the occasion. It was my Independence Day. I poured a generous glass, the dark liquid swirling against the crystal. I didn't gulp it down. I carried it, carefully, out to my small balcony. The rain had stopped, and the air was washed clean, smelling of wet pavement and damp earth. The city lights spread out before me like a fallen constellation. I leaned against the railing, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the wine glass in my hand. For 32 years I had held my breath. I had held it when Isabella got the new bicycle. I had held it when my parents missed my graduation. I had held it when my father cried in my apartment. I had held it when I said goodbye to Alex. Tonight, for the first time, I exhaled. It was a slow, deep, shuddering breath that seemed to start from the soles of my feet and empty every last pocket of pain and silence from my lungs. And then I took another. This one was different. It was easy. It was full. It didn't catch in my throat. It tasted of the cool night air, of rain, and of a freedom so profound, so complete. It felt like I was breathing for the very first time. For 2 weeks, I lived in a bubble of blissful, intentional silence. I had blocked my parents, Isabella, and Marcus. The constant buzzing in my pocket ceased. I went to work, came home, cooked my meals, and read my books. The quiet was a balm, a gentle healing of a wound I hadn't realized was so deep. Then, one Saturday afternoon, a call came through from a number I didn't recognize, but knew belonged to the family's orbit. My Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister, the unofficial town crier of our extended family. I had left her number unblocked out of a detached sense of curiosity. I knew that if I wanted a full report of the wreckage, she would be the one to deliver it. I let it ring twice, took a fortifying sip of my tea, and answered. Hello? Ariana? Oh, thank goodness you answered. I've been so worried. Her voice was a whirlwind of feigned concern and barely concealed excitement. Your mother told me not to call, but I had to. What happened at that party? It was just dreadful. I am so sorry for how they've treated you all these years. The apology was a perfunctory formality, the price of admission for the gossip she was bursting to share. I said nothing, simply waiting. Well, she took a breath, you can't even imagine the fallout. It's all anyone is talking about. Susan from the garden club said she's never seen anything like it. The story has more versions than I have Tupperware lids, but the one thing everyone agrees on is that video you showed. A bank statement at a 60th birthday. It was absolutely brilliant, in a terrifying sort of way. I listened, my expression unchanged. It felt like hearing a summary of a business acquisition, a series of cause and effect events that no longer had the power to wound me. Your parents, of course, are mortified, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They've completely lost face. Your father hasn't been seen at the country club since, and Eleanor, she canceled her weekly bridge game. Canceled it. Apparently, the bank officially called their loan. Without your payments, they defaulted immediately. They had to put the house on the market last week. Where will they go? I asked, the question purely informational. A 2-bedroom condo out by the interstate, one of those beige buildings. Can you imagine? Eleanor in a condo? It's a tragedy. She said the word tragedy with a distinct lack of tragic feeling. Of course, it's all they can afford now. Richard's pension is a joke, apparently. So the stage for their perfect life was being dismantled. The symbol of their success, the house I had saved, was gone. It was a logical consequence. action, reaction. And Isabella, Catherine sighed dramatically. Oh, Ariana, it's a mess, a complete disaster. The story about the car loan got out. Someone must have overheard your mother on the phone before the party. Everyone knows they're leveraged to the hilt. Marcus's big partnership deal? It evaporated. The partners said they couldn't get into business with someone whose finances were so unstable. That's the word they used. I pictured Isabella's perfect Carrara marble kitchen, a monument to a life of debt. They're fighting like cats and dogs, Catherine went on, clearly relishing the details. Marcus blames her for pushing you too far. She blames him for not making enough money to cover their lifestyle. Someone saw them having a screaming match in the parking lot at the grocery store. It seems the perfect team wasn't so perfect without a silent benefactor. She finally paused, waiting for my reaction, for my tears or my anger or my triumph. I gave her none of it. Thank you for letting me know, Aunt Catherine, I said, my voice calm and even. Her own voice deflated slightly, robbed of the dramatic reaction she'd hoped for. Well, yes, of course, dear. I just thought you should know. We're all on your side, you know. We always have been. It was the most audacious lie of all, but it didn't even matter anymore. I appreciate the call, I said, a polite and final dismissal. I have to go now. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the counter. The law of cause and effect, the principles of action and consequence. My family had built their lives on a foundation of lies, propped up by my silence and sacrifice. I had simply removed the props. The collapse was inevitable. There was no joy in it, but there was a profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying sense of order. Justice wasn't a clap of thunder. It was the simple, undeniable math of the universe, finally balancing its books. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. A year can pass like a single day when you're no longer counting down the minutes to the next crisis. The sun streaming through the large glass doors of my balcony felt different now. It wasn't just light, it was warmth I could feel on my skin, a warmth that belonged to me. My home was not a mansion. It was a one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a clean, quiet building, and every square inch of it was mine. I had bought it with the money that had stopped hemorrhaging into the black hole of my parents' secrets. The down payment was the sum of all the trips I hadn't taken, the investments I hadn't made, the life I had deferred. It turned out to be a sizable amount. A wet nose nudged my hand, followed by the gentle thud of a tail against the leg of the armchair. I looked down into the soulful brown eyes of Buster, a scruffy terrier mix I'd adopted from a local shelter 6 months ago. His papers said he'd been found abandoned, a history I understood all too well. He was a quiet, constant companion, a furry, living reminder that a family isn't something you're born into, but something you build. My living room wasn't filled with designer furniture. It was filled with books, a comfortable sofa I'd bought on sale, and a coffee table I had refinished myself. On the balcony, a real sunny balcony, herbs grew in terracotta pots, basil, rosemary, and thyme, their scent drifting in on the morning breeze. It was the garden I had once dreamed of with Alex, a dream I was now living on my own terms. I heard the soft click of a mug being set down behind me. "Found that section you were talking about," Daniel said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He wasn't an architect or a high-powered executive. He was a history professor I'd met at a bookstore, a man with flecks of gray at his temples and an insatiable curiosity. He sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, with one of my dense textbooks on data modeling open in his lap. He didn't just tolerate my work, he was fascinated by it. He said the patterns in data were like the patterns of history, just written in a different language. With him, there were no walls, no secrets. I had told him everything, and he had simply listened, then reached for my hand and said, "It sounds like you saved yourself." I smiled, looking from the thriving herbs on my balcony to the contented dog at my feet, to the man reading my work in the morning sun. My life wasn't loud or flashy. It wouldn't make for a dramatic speech at a country club dinner. It was quiet, and it was small, and it was built not on appearances or obligations, but on the solid bedrock of hard work and hard-won peace. Daniel looked up from the book and caught my eye, his own eyes crinkling in a warm smile. He didn't need to say a word. In that quiet, shared glance, I felt more seen, more valued, and more loved than I had, in a lifetime of trying to earn it from people who were incapable of giving it. This was my victory. Not the spectacular collapse of their world, but the quiet, steady, and radiant construction of my own.